I'm Elizabeth Luciano, an associate professor at Bucks County Community College and director of the short fiction contests. Thank you for being here tonight and joining me in honoring Blake Fiodino, Julia Witty, and Shane Bell, winners of this spring's contest for high school students. We had more than 78 entries this spring, so our students should feel very proud about having placed in the winner's circle. We also expect to be joined later on this evening by our final judge, Professor Jim Freeman. And we're also very happy to have Mrs. Jessica Basta here with us. She is the teacher of 2 of our 3 winners and one of the semifinalists. We also had 3 honorable mentions this year. In no particular order, they are Juliana Taggart of Pennsbury High School for The Perception of Reality, Mia Manton of Neshaminy High School for The Grave of the Cello, and Sarah Catry of Council Rock High School for False Hope. This is the 4th year for the Bucks County Fiction Contests. The program began in 2017 and was modeled after the very successful Poet Laureate program. In addition to this spring contest for high school students, we also have a contest in the fall for adults 18 and older. So our winners this year who are high school seniors could actually join again in the fall if they wanted to do that. If you are an adult in Bucks County who is interested in creative writing and you want to take part in the contest next year, your best bet is to follow the Department of Language and Literature Facebook page, obviously on Facebook. So let me get our program started. It is very important when we do this program to be clear with folks. We have some thank yous, as in the Oscars. So I want to thank the Department of Language and Literature, not only for funding the contest, but also for tons and tons of administrative work that nobody else sees, but is very time consuming. And they do a wonderful job. So thank you to those folks. I also want to thank the college in general for supporting the program. We really do appreciate that. So without further chatter from me, I would like to introduce Mrs. Jessica Basta, who is a teacher at Council Rock High School South and who had a number of winners in the winner's circle this semester. I've asked her to talk a little bit about her approach to creative writing in the creative writing classroom, and also to talk about the assignment that brought forth some really wonderful stories. So Mrs. Basta, what can you share with us?
Thank you very much, Professor. I'm so thrilled to be asked to join you tonight, and I'm so proud of Blake and Shane and Sarah for their wins tonight, that they were recognized for their writing. The assignment that all 3 of them submitted their pieces for was actually part of a kind of a larger project. So we started in February. We were studying short stories of all different lengths and types, different voices, really from around the world. But our focus in our studies was always on what is the author using, what kind of techniques is the author using, and then from there, to what effect. So, authors using techniques for a specific purpose. So we would talk a lot about, the story and the plot and the characters, but always, is there dialogue here for a purpose? Are there flashbacks? Is there irony? What kind of extended metaphors in the story? And then what is the author getting out of that? And I would always try to push them past like, oh, it allows you to envision the scene, kind of, moving beyond that, or enhances the reader's experience of the story, moving beyond that, and things that are a little bit more difficult to prove through textual evidence from a story. And then once we got through that phase in February, I asked the students to write their own individual short stories, and the assignment is really wide open. They can write about anything, really any length, but the one requirement is that they have to utilize literary tools for specified purposes, like the authors that they had been reading. And then actually from there, they partner up with somebody in the class and they swap stories. And then the assignment is to write an expository essay on their partner's story, where they analyze the author's use of a literary technique. So their partner becomes the published author, and they have a day where they interview each other and they talk about, their goals for their piece of writing, and they can highlight passages, that are part of their literary tools. So there's a lot that's invested, not only from, the time that we spend reading short stories, but also the kids know that, my partner's going to read the story, and I have to have, a really specific goal in mind, and I have to have selected a literary tool that's going to have, it's going to get across my purpose. So that's really the assignment that I gave them, and they kind of took it from there. I think just based on my assignment description, you can kind of tell, I think that reading and writing go hand in hand. And, as I told some of these guys, when I received their writing and I could, really see how strong it was, this is a reflection of, kind of years of reading the work of other writers and appreciating it and paying attention to the details and discussing all of the things that can be done with solid writing, messages that can be conveyed, reflections that can be shared with others. And seeing that for so long, and then, kind of taking that all in and combining it with strong writing skills in other areas, and then you produce writing like this. So encouraging students to see themselves as writers, like the writers that they're studying, I think is really important. And, also as reflected in my project, it's a combination of reading and creative writing and analytical writing. And I see them all as kind of, strands that flow together. So I think that the varied roles in that project and seeing how one thing lends itself to the next is all part of what, encourages the kids. But, all that being said, these guys have a vision, and they're very talented. I'm very proud of them. They should be proud of themselves too. It's not just my assignment that got them here, and not just my approach. So that's what I would say. I'm really proud of these guys, and I can't wait for them to share the writing that they came up with for the project.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Basta. I love that idea of having them respond to each other's stories with an expository essay. I might borrow that assignment at some point. I think that's a terrific idea. It looks like our third place winner may not be with us this evening. That is Shane Bell from Mrs. Basta's class, who won for the story, won third place for the story, A Juvenile Economy. However, our final judge is here, Jim Freeman. Professor Freeman, I wonder if you would like to share with us what jumped out to you about Shane's story. Jim, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Slow on the unmute. I wanted to second Ms. Basta's motion that her assignment's wonderful and her teaching's wonderful. She didn't say that, but it's clear that it is. But that the talent in the short story is also a huge component in how successful these stories are and how mature they are beyond their years. I think all that good model reading and writing the expository essay about other colleagues' submissions is wonderful and produced wonderful results. So as far as Shane's piece, A Juvenile Economy, I wrote that it was typical of the strength of the stories here, that they were very high quality and that it had a very mature, beyond its years, and confident third-person narration. Not all of the stories were third-person omniscient point of view, but this one handled that omniscient point of view, that non-participant narrator posture beautifully. That the characters are, what drive the story and drive the plot and point towards conflict and resolution and theme and all those elements of literature that we learn about in writing and literature classes. Miss Crabapple, highly fictional, of course, not not a reflection of reality. Was a particularly memorable character, limned very well in A Juvenile Economy by Shane. But there were a whole host of schoolyard characters who are credible, believable characters, which is no small task for any writer, even a young writer, especially a young writer, to pull off. So I wrote Pleasantly Reminded of a unique perspective in a juvenile economy, short fiction. The kind of perspective that a Thomas Pynchon from some years ago, now hiding still for decades in some kind of reclusive underworld location, maybe New York City, who knows. And I was also reminded of the very best of Kurt Vonnegut's kind of unique, zany, satiric, but also heartfelt perspective in all his writing. So I had lots of good things to say about the juvenile economy.
Thank you, Jim. It looks like Shane is with us. Hi, Shane. We are so glad you could be here.
Hi, I'm so sorry I'm late.
Please, please. We're not, I don't have the attendance book and we're not marking people. So Professor Freeman, who was the final judge, just finished kind of singing your praises as you came in on the end of that. Would you like to read a piece of your story?
Of course.
Okay. How do you feel about starting maybe at the top of page 4 and then going to the end? Does that work for you?
Yep. Let me just pull it up real quick and I'm like all good to go. Thank you.
And I'm going to just share a picture on the screen while you're reading, just to illustrate the story. I find people are a little bit more comfortable with that. So when you see that pop up, don't be shocked, okay?
Okay, thank you. And top of page 4, right?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. On February 8th, after a particular ill-prepared lunch of cardboard-like pizza and chocolate milk, Theo was in dire need of a trip to the bathroom. After stuffing his hall pass into his pocket, he waddled out of the classroom, down the hall, and right before he reached his destination, Theo was stopped by the twin hall monitors, Boris and Bert. At 5'4", the brothers towered over everyone in the grade, and they used their combined physical might to make every interaction unpleasant. Boris and Bert subjected Theo to the usual routine of making fun of him and checking for his hall pass. After the formalities, Theo stepped forward to enter the bathroom, but was once again blocked off by the twin mountains. "Gentlemen, please move aside, for I have some very pressing matters to attend to," Theo said as he tried not to explode. "Oh, hold on there, mate," said Bert. Or was that Boris? Theo had a hard time distinguishing them from each other, as they were so thick he doubted they could either. "There's a fee to use the bathroom now. 2 silly bands per reservation." "What?" Theo nearly exploded. "A fee to use the bathroom? What utter absurdity! What's next? A fee to breathe the air and tread upon earth? I refuse." He tried to shove his way through the brothers, but they easily rebuffed his advance. "That's the way things go now," said one of them. "The bathroom's for paying students only. Break the rules and we'll be forced to report you to the principal." Without any other choice, Theo slid off 2 silly bands and threw them at the boys. "Of course, the first thought that penetrated either of your thick skulls was that of a scam," Theo said as he brushed past them. The twins didn't know how to end a conversation and kept talking during Theo's preoccupation. It wasn't our idea, actually. Jonathan's paying us 5 silly bands a day to watch guard, and all we have to do is give him all the fees of the day. So many students use the bathroom in the day, and basic math would indicate that Boris and Bert were getting the short end of the stick. But considering the fact that they were incapable of basic math, it made sense Jonathan was able to scam them. From there on out, it only got worse. Those who had taken advantage of the new economy bent it to their will. Cassidy, who had sold all her pens for 1 silly band each, was horrified to find that to buy one back would cost her 20 bands for a simple pencil. She would have been consigned to turn in blank assignments and fail had Theo not returned to her the pen she gave him. The class was divided between the haves and the have-nots. The ringing of silly bands off of the student's wrist didn't contain itself to just the classroom. Soon the playground became divided as well. The upper echelons of the recess yard began charging for the use of the play set, the swings, and the equipment. Anyone who attempted to forego the fee was either physically repelled by Boris and Bert, or the recess aide was lied to and told the trespasser was breaking schoolyard rules and would be written up and removed from the playground. It was easy to convince the aides because those richer in Sylvans could pay those who have none to corroborate with their lies. Without funds to access any equipment, almost half of the class was considered to be the sandbox. While not awful, spending recess the same way every day soon grew to be monotonous, and the students took to staring longingly at the playset. It was a far cry from its days of students laughing and swinging from the monkey bars. Now, the richest students sat atop the slides and looked down upon those unable to afford access to the playset. The only game played was a gladiator-type ring, where students paid poor students silly bands to fight one another for the king's amusement, who sat undisturbed atop the slides. Theo tried making the most of the two things. Theo, trying to make the most of things, was digging a hole to bury himself alive in the sand. Standing over a 2-foot hole that was to be his grave, he felt someone come up behind him and violently pull his arm. The offender, Bradley Bronkowitz, tried pulling off the 4 silly bands Theo had wrapped around his wrist, but in the shock of the attack, Theo pulled his arm away and the silly band snapped. As the strings of now worthless rubber fell to the ground beneath them, Theo thought he might implode. He had worked hard for those 4 silly bands and was saving them up so he could play pig during a recess. And now they were gone. He thought he might kill Bradley. Theo ran at him like he was going to. He raised his fist like he was going to. However, before he acted upon his desperation, he realized Bradley was desperate too. They all were. Every single person in the sandbox wanted to have fun and play like they used to. There was certainly enough equipment for everyone to be satisfied during recess, yet somehow all of it found itself in the hands of those who took advantage of the system. Theo was still extremely angry, only now that anger was directed towards something else. So instead of beating up a desperate child, he stood up and made a proclamation to the lot of desperate children. Brothers, sisters, hear me. Why must we grovel in the sand while those who put us here are living like kings? What have they done to earn such wealth? They cheated and coerced honest students who only wanted a chance to succeed in the silly band economy. The silly bands were supposed to enable those who work hard to taste sweet fruits of labor. Yet now they only serve to shackle, to bind us to a system that keeps us, those without silly bands, destitute and keeps the rich adorned with endless menageries. Why do we in turn steal and cheat from each other when the robber barons who have bent the economy towards their will profit off of our suffering? I say nay. No more shall we toil to receive crumbs when we can rise up and take the cake we made. Brothers, sisters, comrades in arms, let us storm the playground to reclaim not only that which we have built, but reclaim a chance at our future. With nothing left to say, Theo began the charge, which soon became a stampede of angry, tired, and empowered students looking to reclaim their lot in life. Boris and Bert stopped Theo in his tracks when he reached the playground, but they had a harder time rejecting students as more came to aid the revolution. And soon the Twin Mountains crumbled and fell. When they reached the slides were the richest who set the idea for the silly band fees and hoarded immense wealth were. The assault on the system truly began. The first couple of students to climb up were rebuffed with kicks from the kings, who held on to the playset for dear life. Yet one after another, they were dragged from the high perches from which they saw the world down to earth. The bracelets were adorned all the way from their wrists to their shoulders, which made it hard to remove them. So instead, they were ripped off, making them useless, even though they had long ago lost their value. Thank you. Sorry for the interruptions and the background.
No. It's kind of what we're living in now. We all roll with it. Thank you so much for reading that. It was lovely to read, but somehow hearing it from you made it even more wonderful. Your intonation and your pacing, and I just love the idea of people agreeing on this currency and then not agreeing on it, and the haves and the have-nots, which we certainly deal with now. So that was some really terrific work. Okay, so we are going to move on now to our second place winner, Julia Witty, who is from Quakertown Community High School. Julia is one of our younger winners. Julia, you are a first-year student, correct? So that is wonderful. Julia is also a musician. She plays the flute and sings, and she loves horseback riding. And Julia won for her story, The Things I Have to Say. So before she reads a portion of her story, I'm going to again invite Professor Freeman to chat a little bit about what made Julia's story a winning story.
Thank you. Julia, you're wonderfully talented, like all of the finalists in the contest. And if you want to talk horses sometime, my daughter is obsessed with horses and works for a veterinary equine North Jersey traveling clinic that does all of Jersey and parts of Pennsylvania. So we'll talk sometime over email if you want. But more to the point, I have to praise your story to high heaven. It's my pleasure to do so. The things I have to say. I don't like the word killer because of its violent overtones, but I have to use it here. I wrote that Julia's short story has a killer first line that's so grabby and alluring and pulls us in, even in the first sentence. I compared it to a famous Stephen Crane opening line from a story called The Open Boat that some folks are familiar with. He wrote for a lifeboat scenario at nighttime in high seas that none of them knew the color of the sky. So her first line, Julia's first line, has that same kind of capture of readers that makes you want to not only continue reading to find out what happens next, but to figure out the setting and to get to know the characters. So absolutely stunning first line. So I'll let Julia read that if she wants to. That's her choice. I also wrote in my notes and enjoying the story and reflecting back on it and rereading it, that the whole conceit, and conceit just means, as you know, idea or premise of the story of sister to brother fictional letters was just really marvelously handled here and by Julia, and that letter fiction is a wonderful kind of subgenre. Sometimes we can build whole stories out of it, as Julia did masterfully here, and other times you'll see it used to good effect as part of a larger work like a novel. But I commend you for trying not an easy type of subgenre of doing fictional letters, in this case from a sister to a brother. It's got all the kinds of suspense you'd expect in a tightly woven short story. The revealing of the surprises is done in a really sophisticated way and in a way that's prepared for, and it seems just right. So the narrator is very confident as a kind of narrator, as protagonist in the things I have to say. And it makes us, the narration and the strong voice that our storyteller who owns the story makes us want to keep reading to find out not only what happens next, but the inner workings of the characters, like Dr. Zucker, who's very well drawn, very rounded character, probably more real than my next door neighbors to me. And the story's wry and smart and ironic and satiric in places. And I'll quit by saying this, Julia. Most of us know the personal story of Woody Allen, and some of us know, his films and the fact that he was a short storyist as well. And he has a great short story collection called Side Effects from the 1980s that some folks might want to discover. Anyway, Julia, more importantly, I compared you to an ethical Woody Allen, if such a thing were possible. So that's high praise, because he's a very talented individual, no matter what happened in his personal life. Okay, so very, very strong work. And again, a story that far better than I could write at your age. And I'm okay now, but it took me decades to get to where you already are in your precocious youth. So keep on growing and keep on writing.
Thank you, Jim. That is very high praise indeed. And I should mention as an aside that Jim Freeman has a new book either coming out or came out a couple days ago. So next time you're on with us, Jim, will you tell us about that?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. I don't want to neglect your accomplishment. So, Julia, do you want to start reading from about the bottom of page 3? And maybe do you want to give us the first line just because Professor Freeman loved it so much?
Sure. So the first line is, I used to write you letters. And then continuing on, hey, remember that day in the park? I must have been around 5 or 6. Remember Mom left us there for a short while to grab something from the car? I wanted to go swimming so bad, but you told me to wait for Mom. I tried, but the sun glinting off the lake's surface was just so tempting. So I went. As it turned out, I was an even crappier swimmer than I thought, because before I even knew what was happening, you were dragging me back to the shallow water. You called for Mom while I coughed up a lungful of dingy lake water. You were always there for me, you know that? I can't remember a single time when I needed you that you weren't there. Heck, even if you were in the middle of a life or death situation, you'd find a way to get to me. You've always been my protector, shielding me from the snares and corruption of the world. Now what am I supposed to do? How on earth am I supposed to go from being loved and sheltered and encompassed by laughter to being invisible? And how am I supposed to deal with this brutal, unforgiving world? The inequities of barbaric people? The weight of the solitude I bear now that you are overwhelmingly gone? Even Mouse has noticed that the house has gone stale. Every room feels stiff and brittle, just like walking in it or breathing too hard could shatter this new reality. The entire house is enveloped in an incessant cloud of utter emptiness, the gaping abyss you left that day. When I came home from school today, Mouse padded over to where I'd collapsed on the old leather couch. She looked up at me, her normally black eyes looked hollow and dull. I won't pretend to be some dog whisperer or something, but I'd be ignorant if I hadn't noticed that question in her eyes. Where? That broke me. My knees were pulled to my chest automatically. I'd developed that position over the past few months, and it's now natural through the muscle memory. I shut my eyes and drooped my head forward. I was past the point of anger, of hatred. I was past the point of sobbing in hopes Mommy would come running and kiss the pain away. I was done with the outward pain, with the force of the hurt. I cried the most excruciating cry known to broken-hearted man. I wept. Silently, without effort, the tears fell, staining my cheeks and compounding with the musty scent of previous heartaches. I felt my heart burning as the last strings holding it together were being tugged at, in knowing that I could not explain to Mouse that you were gone. How does one explain to man's best friend that man is gone? Where does that leave her? Mouse and I shared our pain together, right there on your favorite couch. She rested her fragile head on my foot, and I could feel from the weight of it that she was just as exhausted as I am. I know it's not your fault, and it's not mine either. In fact, the first thing Dr. Zucker did for our family was to make sure we understood that we had no impact on what happened to you. It wasn't our fault, he drilled into us. There was nothing we could have done. But that's just what pains me the most. After all you've done for me, there was nothing I could have done. I couldn't have prepared you for what was going to happen, couldn't have stopped it from happening. I couldn't have even been there with you, holding your hand as you were welcomed home. I couldn't do anything then, and I can't do anything now. Dr. Zucker said I should take my time, I should be patient with myself through this interminable healing process. But I need to tell you exactly what happened. I need to, or I just might lose the last of what I have left. That day, however many months ago it was, you drove me to school like every other day that year. We parted ways, each of us being pushed into the sea of students in separate directions to our own classes. I turned to look back at you. I could just barely make out the crazy cowlick that lived perpetually on your head. You were talking with someone, and I just caught the glimpse of the right side of your face as you turned to look at them. I had the sudden urge to run and give you a hug then, just like old times. Back when we were in elementary school together, or when you started leaving the house early to catch middle school bus, or when you pulled me out of the lake water or held me still when the world spun and shrank around me. I felt the need to give you a hug, those bare hugs you gave when you really meant it. Those bare hugs you gave when it was not okay, but it was because you were there, because I was with you. Because you had me, safeguarded, away from danger, and I was all right. I never did give you that hug. I never fought my way upstream and pushed myself into your arms. Even if it would have embarrassed you to an even earlier death, you would have complied, because you love me. I can't stop rewatching that last hug, the one that never happened, in my mind's eye. I don't think I ever will. And then I came home on the bus because you said you had to make a stop. You never told me where you were going. You always have before, and I suppose that should have sent a red flag out right away, but I trusted you, just as you did me. When I sat down to start my homework, I spread my books out at the front of your couch to bother you when you wanted to relax for an hour after a long day before you would go to work that evening. And then the phone rang. The phone rang, and I reluctantly hoisted myself off the ground and wandered into the kitchen and picked it up. And I couldn't put it down. I couldn't do anything because nothing was real anymore. Suddenly, everything was just an imaginary element of an imaginary world I created in my head. The counter wasn't real. The kitchen you and I had grown up eating afternoon snacks in wasn't real. Even my own body wasn't real. Everything was distant. The phone in my hand felt heavier than a bag of sand, but I couldn't let go. I had to call Mom and Dad. I called your boss, too. I called your best friend, and I even tried to call your cell, but you didn't pick up. Mouse was there that day. Her nails clicked against the wood flooring before she stopped at my feet and looked up at me. I stared back at her, unable to do anything but hold the phone in my hand and lean against the counter. She knew. Thankfully, she knew, because I wouldn't have been able to tell her. I wouldn't have been able to shatter another world. I came home that day and you didn't. I returned home and you vanished. I was left here and you went home. How can you just be gone, just like that? Just leave us here as simply as flicking off a switch. It's going to be okay. I know it will. I just don't know if I can believe it. Everything just feels so awful. The pain runs so deep. But someday, a few years down the road maybe, I'll look at your picture and feel the first bubble of laughter since the joke you told and then ride into school that morning. Maybe I'll move on. Maybe I'll start up the business we always dreamed of running together. Maybe I'll save you a seat at my graduation or accept the diploma you never received. Maybe this heart of mine will heal. Despite all these uncertainties, I know without a doubt I'll see you someday. It just feels so far away, so impossible. As for now, I'll do what that lunatic Dr. Zucker says and keep telling myself that I'll see you soon until I believe it, or until I'm able to give you what's rightfully yours, a bare hug of my own. I miss you, brother, and I have to be honest, so I have to say that this sucks. It really does. I never knew you could cause me so much pain, but here I am, and somehow you have. Just enjoy life up there, okay? Enjoy it, because I don't know how long it will be until I can enjoy mine down here. I love you. Goodbye. Forever your little sister.
Thank you, Julia. And, just as in Shane's story, hearing you read it just brings it so much more to life, even than having read it on the page, although it was very powerful on the page. Julia did not write this for a class assignment, and in fact, her brother heard about the contest and let her know about it. So we have to thank your brother for bringing this story, inspiring the story, and thank you for sharing it with us. Our first place winner this evening is Blake Fiodino for his story, The Train Station. Blake is going to read for us in a moment, but first we'll have Professor Freeman tell us what stood out about Blake's story.
I'd be glad to. I picked Blake's story, The Train Station, as first choice for several reasons. We talked about conceits for stories with Julia's story, and here Blake uses the conceit of this Dante inscription at the beginning of the story just beautifully. He weaves it into the fabric of the story throughout, like a fine tapestry with a continual color theme that runs throughout the object. The narrator as protagonist, again, as in the other stories, is a very strong voice. and becomes a protagonist because of owning the story through the point of view. The character of Pop, as you'll hear in the train station, is very well drawn, very well created in a few well-chosen words spread throughout the story and sprinkled in masterful fashion. The characters are vivid and real and fully realized in not very many words, which to me is miraculous. It's not that the story is short, it's that the ways in which Blake can reveal character are very efficient. The train station motif, to go along with the conceit or reason for being, isn't derivative at all, but it brings up to mind lots of great model readings where travel, places, and scenarios are an integral part of the story or the play. I thought of Arthur Miller, famous play called Incident at Vichy, for its use of a train station in a different context, but also really well integrated and well done. I thought that as I read the train station and thought about that whole motif of the action happening there. The interior monologue technique is not easy to do. Blake, as a poet, did some wonderful interior monologue poems, as did many other poets. Fiction writers, Sherwood Anderson was pretty darn good at interior monologue, and Blake has learned that lesson, and he uses it in the train station, that bold and italic typography, to go into the inner reverie of his characters in a very mature way. He's obviously done some reading and has a lot of talent and has the ability to use techniques that he's learned through his reading in his own unique way, making them his own. I myself try interior monologue technique a lot, and to see it done so well in a person so young is really, really gratifying. So to throw some more names around, whether these names mean that much to you or not, they mean a lot to me. I compared Blake's story, A Train Station, and his talents to the kind of professional effects that writers like Jane Ann Phillips, who used to be one of my teachers many years ago, has accomplished as a novelist. A wonderful short story is called Mark Costello came to mind when I read Blake's story at the train station. Supposedly third world writer who's wonderful, named Juan Rulfo, is an interior monologuist, and Blake's story reminded me of Juan Rulfo's work. And lastly, I commented that Jim Galvin, the poet and prose writer, is also quite good at interior monologue, and I thought of him when I was reading the train station by our Blake. So I wanted to commend you, all of you, on writing beyond your years. I think that takes a kind of a sensitivity and an openness to the world, and ability to use your senses, an ability to think critically, because all writing is creative, not just creative writing, like we've done here. And I promise just one quick word about my new book, and it bears on you. It's called COVID-19 True Fictions, Before, During, and After. And it's 10 short stories about the very beginning of the pandemic, the middle of the pandemic, and what I foresee as the post-pandemic era in fiction. I think your fictions, Shane and Julia and Blake, tell the truth better than the truth tells the truth. I've long said that about fiction, that it's heightened, it's more organized than reality, and therefore it's art, because you make up your fictions out of reality. Julia knows that in her letter, Sister to Brother, but you work the controls of fiction, you work the controls of art. And so your painting, as it were, or your sculpture, as it were, is heightened reality. it's better than reality. And your stories are all better than reality. Well, that said, I'll turn the floor over to Blake, who's been very patient listening to me wax eloquent.
I can't really add anything to that, Blake. So if you'd like to read us your story, we would love to hear it.
Of course. Now you know how much my love for you burns deep in me when I forget about our emptiness and deal with shadows as with solid things. I could recite Dante's lines in my sleep, unconsciously. Leading up to the first time reading his work freshman year, I remember a feeling of dread consuming me. I genuinely laughed at the thought of my teacher thinking a bunch of awkward 15-year-olds could comprehend the Divine Comedy, arguably one of the greatest and most intricate literary works in the history of man. But I'll admit, I was completely and utterly enamored from the very first line of Canto 1 of Inferno. However, I considered Volume 2 of Dante's ungodly lengthy narrative poem to be my favorite. How anyone could write about such an unknown supernatural realm with such ingenuity and detail, I wasn't sure. I just knew that Dante managed to do it. The familiar woodsy aroma of sandalwood and orange peel drew me back into reality, and I met my grandfather's wide-eyed smile as I looked up from my worn-down copy of the Divine Comedy. My brothers and I always joked that if Pop's booming voice didn't give him away first, his signature cologne certainly would. I thought you'd be just about sick of that book by now with the amount of times I've seen you holding it, Pop sneered at me. We should start heading to the platform now. Grab this for me, would you? He threw down his 2 bags towards me and took a swig of his infamous watered-down coffee from his stainless steel thermos. Yeah, of course. Just 1 second. I finished the last line of the stanza I was on and went to crease the already crumpled up page in a hurry. Shit. The quick sting of the all-too-familiar papercut shocked me. Quickly, I brought my thumb to my mouth to soothe the cut out of reflex. I braced myself for the metallic taste of blood that I swore would come, but there wasn't any. Huh, that's weird. Shaking off my hand, I slipped the book into my backpack and then shrugged it onto my shoulders. Jesus, Pop, I snorted out with a laugh. What are you keeping in these? Aren't you just staying one night? Listen, I don't know how these city doctors work. One day they're telling you that you just need to have a checkup on your lungs, and the next they might force you to stay for a week, he remarked quite nervously. I must have had a worried look in my eyes because he quickly added, "It was just a joke, kid. I'll be home tomorrow. Just don't forget to pick me up." He managed a faint smile. Now, let's go before you make me late. I trailed behind my grandfather to the entrance while he kept the pace quick. Thinking about spending time in a train station again, even just to see Pop off, skeeved me out. Train stations and I weren't the best of friends. I considered myself Kempton in a tidy fashion, and every train station I've ever been in has proved to oppose just that. Dirt seemed to be the abundance in every nook and cranny. Dirty people, dirty smells, dirty noises. But I knew I had to get over myself on this one occasion, as my grandfather, who has done such good for everybody around him, has asked for me to help him this one time. How could I deny such a simple request from such a kind man? Pop opened one of the double doors for me, and the wind created from its momentum swept my hair to its side. This specific station made me question my previous prejudice on them all. It was stunning. The first thing I noticed was the skylight. It opened so wide that the eyes naturally navigate up the silver walls and right into its center. The glass panels were intricately adorned with gold wrapped like vines with roses protruding from the sides. They looked awfully beautiful today, as the milky white clouds reflected even more sunlight onto them. "Shut your mouth, you'll catch flies," Pop whispered in my ear as he nudged me forward. "We have to get to the baggage check-in." The baggage check-in? Something wasn't adding up to me. I thought that was only for flying. Stopping in his tracks, Pop turned his head to me amusingly and said, "You know what? Me too. I heard it's just a new thing they're doing now, just to make sure if your baggage is good enough for boarding." Good enough, I thought to myself. Whatever you say. He guided me through the curiously crowded main floor. As I looked around, I couldn't help but notice a sea of gray before me. I joked with Pop on the car ride here that one of us had to change because we both had the idea of wearing gray. Pop was modest, of course, with just a pair of gray slacks with a bit of sheen and a plain white button-up. I, on the other hand, sported similar slacks, just with a checkered pattern, a cream-colored knit sweater that I got this past Christmas, and a dark gray overcoat that could almost pass as black. Nevertheless, here we were not just matching with each other, but with what looked like hundreds of perfect strangers. For the most part, there were older people filing through the station. There was a white-haired woman walking with her hands behind her back while whistling a tune that sounded all too familiar, but not enough for me to put a name to it. A younger man, I would say about 40, walked swiftly past her, and upon bumping into her, he came to a halt and apologized. I turned my head to the left and saw what could only be siblings bickering with each other. They had to be around my age, in their 20s, and when they felt my glare, they stopped fighting and gave me a nod of recognition. I nodded back with a weak smile. The most memorable interaction, however, was a woman and her baby. Pop and I eventually reached the line for the baggage check, and I was just occupying my time by guessing the names of random people. Marcus, Annabelle, Beth, Francis, John, Claudia, Andrew, George. That's definitely a George if I've ever seen one in my life. And then her eyes met mine. They were the kindest eyes I had ever seen. The brown of her iris sparkled like gold when the light from the ceiling reflected off of them. They were almond-shaped, with crow's feet just emerging from the sides of her eyes. She must have smiled a lot, as I just have never seen one so defined. And her smile, God, her smile. When I used to hear people comment on a smile that can light up any room, I took it as an exaggeration, outlining how nice an individual smile could be. I think I truly saw what that phrase meant in that moment, though. Her smile caused me to focus in on her energy, her being. My previous preoccupation with the architecture of the station and the people inside of it vanished. I could feel within myself a warmth that transpired in my core, which then ran rampantly through the entirety of my body. She was the heavenly source of light, it seemed. My gaze worked its way down to her arms that carried a sleeping baby boy. "You're going to hold up the line," Pop murmured through almost closed lips. "Let's go." It was our turn to get the baggage weighed. I turned my head back once more to get a view of the kind-eyed girl again, but she wasn't near the bench anymore. Picking up Pop's baggage off the floor, I struggled to reach the counter. Just as we were about to reach the scale for the bags, she walked right in front of us. Again, her eyes met mine, but this time she winked. I started to ask for her name, but she drew her index finger over her lips and then glanced down to the sleeping child. She continued on, her white dress whipping my knees as it went past. "It's okay," I told myself. "I'll get her name once we get our bags checked." 10 seconds later, I realized that wouldn't be possible, as she managed to reach the train car and board. "All right, now, just put them on the scale," my grandfather guided me. "There we are." "I got it, Pop. Thank you." The attendant behind the scale giggled under her breath at my straining under the bag's weight. But then I realized something that caught me off guard. "Hey," I got the attention of the attendant. "Why didn't that girl with the baby have to wait in line and check her bag?" Once again, she laughed. "Her? She travels through here every day. Work. We don't need to check her. And do you really think that baby needs to be checked?" "Oh," I exclaimed embarrassingly. "No, I just thought that..." I trailed off. I waited for a number to appear on the scale, but it never showed up. Nevertheless, the attendant smiled at my grandfather and said, "You're good to go," with a sincere tone of gentleness behind her words. The process of how the attendant could tell if the bags were at an appropriate weight baffled me, but I was not about to question her again. The attendant took the bags behind her counter and threw them onto the luggage carousel and waved us toward the platform. Pop gently nudged me and we were off. We continued to travel opposite the entrance towards the platforms. The woman directly in front of us kept a steady rhythm of stilettos hitting the linoleum and vinyl flooring under our feet. All of a sudden, my ears perked up with the sound of music. It was definitely a horn playing, but which one I wasn't exactly sure. Following along with the steady stream of people, we arrived in quite a crowded mass. There were children, coincidentally, all wearing simple white t-shirts, running around, chasing each other while wearing the look of sheer delight across their faces. As I was watching to figure out which playground game they were playing, Two of them, both girls, whipped around me and I turned quickly around out of reflex. What I would do to go back to those years, I heard Pop whisper to himself with a soft smile. Everything was so simple and innocent. I decided not to comment as I felt like I would be intruding on his thoughts. However, I was also kept silent because upon turning around, I located where the music came from. It was a trumpet playing after all. The performer was in his 30s, I would guess, and was beautiful. His skin was an enriched sepia reddish-brown shade, which seemed to illuminate honey when the light hit his damp forehead. I couldn't describe what genre he was playing. All I know that it was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Our eyes met after a few moments and measures passed, and I saw his lips curl into a smile over the mouthpiece once he had a beat or two to breathe. I couldn't return the favor because I suddenly felt something beside me, or rather the lack thereof. My eyes opened wide as a cold sweat broke across my forehead. He isn't here. I know he didn't just leave me here. And I knew he never would do that. Something was wrong. Almost as if on cue, the hundreds of train passengers that were just standing stagnantly moments ago were now doing anything but. Stranger after stranger bumped into me as I tried to navigate which train Pop would have boarded, but there seemed to be no hope. The disorientation that came with the constant movement that was occurring all around me, mixed with the fear that something had happened to Pop, was a muddled cocktail which made my head swell and breath short. I turned in circles and circles, wondering where he might be, wondering what could have happened, wondering if I might see him before the trains are off. But then, there she was again, the woman with the beautiful smile and crow's feet. She was on the train to the left of me with her head sticking out the window. In here, her eyes seemed to tell me. And I listened. I felt my legs move under me, running to the side of the train. I hopped across the small opening between the door and the platform and landed recklessly on my feet. Straightening out my overcoat, I started to move cautiously between the cabins, trying not to look too conspicuous. I had no luck after looking in 6 cabins, and I resorted to asking the other passengers if they had seen a man fitting the description of my grandfather. But the most strange thing occurred. Nobody answered me. No, nobody even acknowledged me. It was as if they couldn't hear me. The siblings I saw earlier were still engaged in conversation. They didn't stop to answer my question. The older woman with white hair was sitting with herself, staring at the window with sparkling eyes. She didn't turn her head towards me. And the man that bumped into her was just 2 cabins down, reading a newspaper. He didn't look up from reading. Just as I was about to lose hope, I heard his page shuffle and saw his hand start to move. He was pointing his finger towards the very back of the train car, still without looking up and without words. But just then, I almost fell backwards. I heard a loud whistle. The train was departing. Again, I collected myself and straightened my coat and decided to find him. A night in the city didn't seem so bad after all. I reached the last cabin in the car, praying my grandfather was inside. Strangely enough, call it intuition, I knew he would be sitting there. I turned rather sharply into the opening, and I found my stomach turning into knots and a single tear cascading from my left eye. The cabin was vacant, save a stainless steel thermos with the remnants of watered-down coffee. A single glowing beam from the skylight shone through the window. Its light illuminated the dust particles in the cabin, which seemed to bring them to life, almost to the point in which I started to believe they did have a life of their own. They danced across the light, pirouetting through the room and out the window. I watched them as they floated to the skylight and until they disappeared.
Thank you, Blake. Two of our 3 stories were about loss, different kinds of loss and at different moments in life, but clearly that's something that is on people's minds these days, and you all did a beautiful job. This brings our evening to a conclusion. I promised I wouldn't keep you too long. Again, I want to thank Mrs. Jessica Basta for joining us. It was a real treat. Keep doing that great stuff at Council Rock South. Thank you to Professor Freeman for joining us, and offering your thoughts on our winners' stories. And thank you to Blake and Julia and Shane for your lovely, lovely writing. I do hope that you will keep it up because you all really have something special going on. Also, to everyone who joined in on YouTube, friends and family and colleagues, thank you for taking a little time to be with us tonight, and have a great evening. And thank you again to our winners.